to Andreas Weiss. He is German, like I am. He is actually the head of digital business models of ECO. And Andreas, this is like a title really that is really cool. It's the Association of the Internet Industry. Very nice to have you. You're also a director of Eurocloud, Germany, and you're here as a coordinator for the Gaia-X Association, the technical committee on federated services. So I'm looking very much forward to your presentation. I know you're personally a chemist. You're talking to us from Cologne, I guess. So you have lots of history. If anybody's interested into more of his work, look it up on online, datamagazine.online, and also I think you have some talks on YouTube, which are very interesting. Thank you very much for presenting, and please start.
Yeah, thank you very much for this kind introduction, and welcome everybody. I would love to stay with you in Norway, because it will be the first time for me to be in Norway, hopefully next time, but due to all the constraints we are seeing right now, I'm more than happy at least to share some insights about Gaia-X during this session. And yeah, you got my background, and after you had this deep dive around how to manage PACS system, I need to open now the scenario for a more wider view and just consider if you want, for example, to share such data you're managing in such an imaging processing environment with others, you might see already some challenges in terms of how to guarantee that such images are just processed on the receiver as agreed upfront, how to transfer a terabyte of data from A to B, or even the constraint you're not even allowed to share such data, but you want to open it to apply algorithms for AI processing, and to want to, let me say, extract some information which are anonymized and so on. So these are the challenges I'm pretty sure you have also discussed within your teams. Now, the initiation of Gaia-X, just as a background here, came from the industry. Those who are capable to digitize their internal processes, build up digital twins, have all the sensors in place, and then they are understood. Now, we are capable to collect all this data, mainly on an on-premise environment, but we have understood if you want to share such data for smart service concepts, say smart city, smart mobility, but even also to apply AI services, we understood we are not capable to drive all such AI environments on premise, so we need something in the cloud or wherever, and therefore we have to transfer data. But even such data out of industrial processes are seen as intellectual property. And this was a kind of initiation to discuss this concept of Gaia-X, and I just want to share some core concepts and core considerations around it. This discussion led us to the assumption we need to address an ecosystem and an overall architecture to build data-driven services and business models within highly distributed systems. So we need to get rid of this cloud-centric approach, which is pretty nice and well orchestrated, but you have all the problems in terms of compliance assessment, in terms of deep integration of specific technology stacks, and also bandwidth constraints. And there are a lot of dependencies which might raise to single providers if you enter these hyperscaler environments, for example, and it is still open how to keep data sovereignty. So what we decided in the core decision around Gaia-X, we need to respect, first of all, especially for Europe, the European values and standards. And there are a lot of them, not just GDPR, We have the EU Cybersecurity Act, we have EIDAS, and we have other further requirements. And we should apply to standards where applicable, like W3C, ETSI, Sentinel-like, ISO. Saying this, Gaia-X is not here to reinvent the world. It is just to orchestrate what is out there, but to keep this level of data sovereignty. And I really would like to separate this discussion from any considerations around digital sovereignty or European sovereignty. So this is a different level, but really Gaia-X in the first place scopes on data sovereignty. What does it mean especially? So the key purpose again of Gaia-X is to drive innovation. So this is not to achieve any kind of sovereignty, really to drive innovation, because this is what the German market, the European market needs in the first place, to apply new digital services into their common business models, or even build up new business models based on data. The second part is, therefore, we need appropriate transparency and attract and showcase the attractiveness of digital services. So there's still something to convince that this change in this digital model based on data and the integration with existing processes really shows value. And we can get this level only when we apply a level of or means of data sovereignty. As I said, this is an asset. There's always an owner of this data, and they would like to keep control on this level of data. And we need to reduce dependencies to certain provider infrastructures. We need to open it. And this is, again, this challenge to address a decentralized ecosystem with cloud services, edge services, interconnection services, all these things in a good orchestration layer. Now, this is really then this shift from a one-way, one single provider environment into a multitude of providers and a full level of interoperability between all these providers. And you might imagine this is already a challenge by itself, but even more when it comes to the edge, when we are getting to these business cases like smart mobility. Just consider that a car already, a modern car which is prepared for autonomous driving produces already more than 1.5 terabyte per hour as data. And just imagine to transfer all the data via GSM to any backend provider. It takes some time, it is quite costly. And if you have millions of cars who are using such services, even our current interconnection or connection capabilities will be exhausted completely. So you need to balance always a kind of local processing and a remote processing. And the interaction is mostly given by data. And when it comes also to real-time processing, then you need capacities which are not more than 100 kilometers away from where the data and the processing requirement occurs. Just considering that light speed is endly, so you cannot exceed this. And this is really what we are targeting, this open ecosystem, and additionally with the connection of the infrastructure layer and the data layer, because this was also a kind of level of separation. In the past, you had infrastructure providers said, hey, here's my infrastructure. You can process whatever you want, and even your data, but I don't care what kind of data you're processing. But this leads to real complex questions in terms of regulation, in terms of understanding where are data stored, where are they getting processed, how to keep track on GDPR requirements, and so on and so forth. So we had to combine both areas, the data ecosystem and the infrastructure ecosystem, in the various layers of the core provider technology, then to consider portability and interoperability. And on the upper space, this new term of data spaces, which is still a kind of abstract term, I understand this, but it is more the interconnection of logical data which serves for certain advanced smart services. For example, if we talk about mobility, of course, it's not just traffic information. You need weather data, you need logistic information, a multitude of information which are getting combined together for a certain purpose and for certain analysis. So this is a quite open and distributed ecosystem by itself, these data spaces, but we have to bring them together, and therefore we have this federation services approach. And what is this federation services? You can dig in detail. We have thousands of pages of specifications, but I just want to give you a first brief information. These federation services, and I really would like to outline this term federation. Federation, and within the EU, Norway is a federation, Germany is a federation, Netherlands is a federation. They are linked together in a wider system, but they have still this level of self-determination. So it's kind of shared balances between who rules what. And in this case, we think this term federation is appropriate for Gaia-X, because a federation should always be capable to decide who is in and who is out. And this is more in the level of identities and access rights. Then they should also be in the driver's seat to decide what are the services we want to use and whom to expose. And I'm not talking just about these standard commodity cloud services. When it comes, for example, to data sharing services, this is a very individual approach, and you need to be very clear who can have insights about this description of such services, and this should be managed by a federation. Sample, to give you just a sketch sample, Gaia-X is one of these lighthouse federations. This is a group of automotive manufacturers and their service companies and suppliers, and they are working together for joint business cases and use cases, for example, in terms of supply chain management, resilience of supply chains, and also to track carbon footprint and so on. So this is new that companies like Volkswagen, Porsche, Daimler, BMW are acting together, although they are competitors, because they understood we are targeting the same challenges and we need to target them jointly and build up common ecosystems where we can share information, cross over our companies and entities, together with all the thousands of suppliers we are engaging for our services. And this is a different paradigm, and it is also an alternative to the so-called platform approaches, where you have a centralized approach. Everything is linked together by one global or single platform, which is a kind of imbalancing the relationships between the actors. Now, what we are promoting here is a kind of toolbox to set up to operate such federations according to the Gaia-X principles. And this is mainly in these four areas: identity management, federated catalog management, then compliance and data sovereignty services. And as an add-on, we are also targeting a kind of portal to orchestrate such services. Now, when it comes, for example, to identity management, then we are talking mainly about SSI, according to EIDAS, so self-sovereign IDs with an appropriate implementation, which always keeps the user and the owner of this identity in the driver's seat. He is capable to say what information I'm sharing with my other parties, what is the relationship between, for example, an organization and an individual, which is a kind of principle within a participant, and all these things. And we are all totally aware that this SSI is a new concept, but we need to go into this direction in terms of sovereignty. And this is the first starting point, having sovereign identities. Now, in terms of the catalog, well, there are already a lot of cloud service descriptions out there, but we are getting to a much more complex level of complexity in terms of service descriptions, end-to-end descriptions, and this is a kind of ongoing moving target. In this sense, we are implementing this federated catalog as a kind of graph approach, not a standard SQL layout, and with interconnection of all these services and the linking points up to the level of how to orchestrate them, how to deploy them. So such service descriptions might result in a set of thousands of attributes, which can be used to manage these services on the highest layer. In terms of data sovereignty service, yeah, as we are now in the level that we could clearly identify, even on a legal level, the participants and the principals with SSI. We are also capable to offer contracting services when you opt in for a kind of data service, and also monitor it in terms of how to build incentives. And just to let you know, as you're more of the scientific community, we already shared these discussions with EOSC, for example, the European Open Science Cloud, and we are pretty close together, not in terms of the business model, but in terms of the core challenges and how to address them. And this is really what we are aiming for in the future, to bring this on a good level. So as I said, these Gaia-X Federation services is a minimum set of services to operate a Gaia-X Federation, but it is not a product. It's just a tool set. So you cannot buy Gaia-X, and you cannot even buy Gaia-X Federation services. You can probably ask someone to operate them, but it is just a set of services, and they are not monitored by anyone outside your federation or those who would like to apply them. This is on your purpose. Just to give you a short, simple sample how this works in practice. Such federation services must be, of course, as they are services, that you need a kind of federator. So one entity is capable to start such services, which is more on these aspects of federated identity, the catalog service, sovereign data exchange. And if you then start, well, the first is to entitle to onboard the participants. So they have to describe themselves. So it should be very transparent, but who is participant A and who is participant B. And they will get an entity for this federation. So this is a kind of entry in their own wallet. Now you're entitled to be part of this federation, but it's just stored at the participant level. The next is then that they, for example, one is offering data, the other is looking for this data, so they can the offering party can describe it in the catalog, also with the terms for usage policies. For example, you can use this data for the next 4 weeks, but just for a certain purpose. And then they can negotiate a contract. Yeah, I would like to opt in for this data, and this contract is captured. This is still a kind of Ricardian contract, not a smart contract, because there are still some open legal questions, but it's the right direction already. And then at a certain point, there will be then the trigger of a data exchange. And therefore, there's another open source environment like Eclipse Data Space Connector to build up a standardized connection entity between the sender and the receiver, but of course, in dependency to the identities, the contract terms, and so on and so forth. So these are the things we are going to orchestrate. And as I just want to outline some samples like the Tina-X, you can have a look at it. Then we have also some sample implementations by Ocean. Ocean is a concept which is prepared also to support computer data. So as I said, sometimes you cannot even mobilize data, but you can potentially allow access to get information out of the data according to algorithms, which must be then executed on the data owner side. So this is something which is addressed by Ocean. On the other side, there are other concepts like international data space to build up also such frameworks to share data between a multitude of partners. There's an open source implementation like this Eclipse Data Space Connector. And just to let you know, all the federation services are open source according to Apache License 2. We are going to shift this also into the Eclipse environment. And we just started the development, and you can get tangible results by April, May next year. And we're also conducting a set of hackathons where you can be engaged also to align and to enhance these federation services. So this is the high level. Just get also further insights from the webpage, gaia-x.eu, with the technical architecture, the federation services white paper, and also how to build up data spaces and what are the business contexts. It's a long list of use cases. Yeah, and in this sense, this is our current journey, and yeah, there are some further links, and I'm happy for further questions about this. To be honest, I can talk for hours and days just around Gaia-X. It's a very huge project at all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas. We have time for some questions from the audience on Discord. There is, for example, Alexander, who is just curious about the definition of data being shared. So he's asking, what about other information? What is the difference between just data that is shared and metadata or derived data? Would those also be shared on the same platform? Would they become who is the owner of those, the user or the originator of the resource?
Yeah, in general, this is more a domain-specific or use case-specific questions. So Gaia-X is aiming to collect at least mandatory information in terms of this trusted environment and to manage it, also in terms of contracting, usage policies, ODRL, and so something like this. Then the next level is to target this question around ontologies, vocabularies, because at the end of the day, in a level of abstraction, we are talking about metadata and payloads. So whatever the payload is, this is then the precise data. And this is, in general, kind of information sharing. Either I share you the raw data or I share you the results out of an algorithm. But at the end of the day, it is information sharing between two parties. And I just still want to avoid this question of a platform. A platform is something different than a federation, because a platform is more a centric approach, probably as an intermediate between these participants. And we would like to enforce the direct relationship between participants on a direct way. So it's just a two-entity negotiation in the first place. The second, the receiving entity can be still a marketplace or a data mod or whatever, but in the first place, it is a direct relationship between a sender and a receiver. So in terms of how to describe the data, this is more also in the areas of the domains. So they should describe these ontologies, and we should keep Gaia-X agnostic on this level. What we should support is really this level of data to compute or compute to data, because of course for this compute to data approach, you need much more than just handing over some data, because you need then the computing infrastructure, you need an alignment on algorithm of the syntax, of the engines which should be used, and so on and so forth. So I think compute to data has an additional level of complexity, but the advantage that it is much easier to keep this, let me say, data usage technical enforcement, because you can just cut off the lines and you can just evaluate what is the result of this algorithm, and am I fine with this or not? If you're going to hand over the data to a third party, then we are getting more on this contract relationship. Are you, and this is in the first step, just an organizational enforcement, keep up the liability, but there are also concepts, for example, in IDSA, to have a more technical enforcement by isolating the data and the receiving containers and so on. I think we need to learn more about these models and how to establish a fair share data principle like EOS is addressing. Well, this is probably a complete different story in the industry. We cannot pre-assess it. So this is more the discussion level on the domains, not on the core technical concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Maybe one more question from me. I know you're a firm believer in open source, and at the same time, we're talking about an industry that is adopting open source as a method to share knowledge. Do you think that this is something that will stay? It is very hot right now, but will we have this in 20 years as well?
Well, first of all, you can talk about intellectual property and route code for years and years and years without any result. And this is still a leading attitude of our European companies. of course, they would like to protect their IP, but now with Gaia-X, we already had a good consensus. Let us, at least on the core level, where the core standards and the core services are established, let's keep it as open source. So this is our common building block, where we agree on standards, where we agree on concepts and architectural and functional implementations. And everyone then can go from there and build up their own individual intellectual property services, whatever they want. So as long as we can keep this principle, what should be shared among all parties within a Gaia-X ecosystem should be open source and open specification. And the rest, we don't want to get any insights into the business cases. And you know that, for example, the automotive industry is quite sensitive in this sense. They can do what they want as long as they stick to the principles. And we also discussed, do we should apply copyleft? Do we copyleft or something like this? For the time being, we stay with Apache license. They can fork it. Everyone in the world can fork it. I don't care, as long as we have a good, stable core environment. And this is the current approach. This might change in the future, but for the time being, we keep this direction.
Good. Thank you very much.